longevity lifestyle designer. This is Governor Secrets of Longevity.com. So over the years that I've been doing research and making videos on longevity and long-term sustainable health, I've come across a lot of different stories around long-lived individuals, and it's kind of fun and interesting to look at those stories and whether they're valid or not, and what information was available about their diets and lifestyles in general. Now, I don't put particularly strong importance or emphasis on following any of these ideals. They're just examples which can be inspirational to some degree. They can give us insight towards potential in certain ways. Anyone trying to create a system just around one person or even one culture's diet and lifestyle is not very scientifically valid. You've probably heard me in the past talk about how there's roughly four things that I think we need to factor in to make any decisions about what is the ideal lifestyle and choices we can make if our end goal is long-term sustainable health. And that's largely, yes, you can take individual examples, whether the person's young and just looks really vibrant and good at what they're doing, if you're talking about from an athletic point of view, or if they're a very old person. You can take that as inspiration, so that's one factor. You can definitely take examples from long-lived cultures and those that have very low chronic diseases. A lot of people refer to Weston and Price's work in this type of scenario, but also you see a lot more movement towards things like the Blue Zones, which was a book written by Daniel Buettner, who works for National Geographic. They were looking at a lot of long-lived cultures. Then, of course, you have the basic scientific and physiological information, which I think is one of the cornerstones that we have to be aware of, and use that as a way of balancing this other information against that, but also not taking scientific fact as, the be-all and end-all of everything, because we have examples that sometimes throw the ideas of that off balance. Then, of course, we ultimately come down to our own personal experience. You could have everyone saying this is the best thing ever, do this way, this is the way that people are going to be healthy. But if it doesn't sit right with you, no matter how doggedly you stick to it and follow it to a T, if you're experiencing problems or problems come up because you've been on this lifestyle or this plan, you have to listen to your own body. So each of these four things can have different weights to them in terms of what we want to emphasize in our life, but ultimately it comes down to having a balance of them all as we embark upon new information and integrate it into our lives. So emphasizing the one thing about individual examples, like I was saying, I've always come across these interesting examples. Some can be extremely outlandish. They tend to be the more legendary ones from the past, when you talk about like biblical figures or even figures from other cultures like Peng Zhu from China. Very interesting historical and lifestyle type things we can take from that. But there's claims that he lived to be 800 years old, so we have no way to verify that. Just look at his lifestyle and perhaps you can glean some things from that. Then, of course, many of us have heard of Li Chungyun. That is definitely a little more on the edge of having some validity because it was more recent in historical time. And there's some stories that were passed on and witnesses that were alive back in the early 1900s that had written the article and things like that. But once again, we can't validate these things. And what I'm going to talk about today is 5 super centenarians that have gotten some publicity over the last decade or so that I've come across over time. And while they're not hard enough concrete facts around their birth, we don't have birth certificates that are valid enough that Guinness Book of World Records can recognize them. But just the fact that they exist, some of them are still alive, and they have this potential for having been older than even Jean-Louise Calment of France, who's still on record to have been the longest lived person ever, because we want to be very thorough in being able to make that claim and say 100% that we're sure of that. She still holds the title. She lived to be 122. These people all passed her, and it's likely that they are valid, but there's not that 100% ability to confirm it. But we're going to talk about them anyway. So number one was one that has been recent in the news, and he just surpassed 122 years old. 123-year-old man from Bolivia named Carmelo Flores. He's a farmer in a semi-agriculture, semi-indigenous area in the Andes, or near the Andes Mountains. And I'm going to actually stick a link below to the news article, and you'll see links 1 to 5 here as I talk about these 5 different stories. And he, in terms of his diet, ate, according to the interview, a mixture of very simple quinoa, mushrooms, chewed on coca leaves. He had some meat in there. If you check out the picture, you can see he has a very aged look about him. It's hard to know exactly whether it's a valid story or not. They're still actually looking into this one because it's more recent, and who knows, he might be able to surpass Jean-Louise Calment if there's good enough records. It's also interesting to know he lives at 4,000 feet in a basic straw hut. So simple living, simple diet, but pure food, pure air. Probably gets exercises going up and down mountains, and you see that in a lot of long-lived cultures as they live in areas that are often very hilly. So going to and from town is actually a workout in and of itself. Story number 2 is of an Uzbekistani woman named Tuti Yusupova, and at the time that the story came out, I remember seeing it posted by a few people on Facebook and other social networks. She was still alive at 128. I'm not sure if she's still alive. I believe that was a year or two ago, so she would be around 130 if she was still alive, if her age is true to the fact. Again, this is someone we can't confirm. There wasn't much to say about her lifestyle. Actually, she claims to have been born in 1880, so by today, if she was still alive, she'd be at least 133 or so. And this third story is a little more validated in that there's more up-to-date information. It's a woman from China, and proper birth certificates in China were not kept until after the Chinese Revolution. So there's a lot of people in very rural areas who definitely didn't have good birth certificates from the time that they were born, of course, at least not by Western standards. And China has a lot of good pockets for longevity, but we can't validate a lot of these claims. But we can see what it is they're doing. You can see that there's a higher density of centenarians in those areas. And there's actually both an article, but also a link in the same section 3 below this video. There's a link to a Journeyman Pictures YouTube video, which is how I first came across it. I'll link to it right here as well. And it's a segment on this whole area, this valley up in the mountains. A lot of long-lived people, and they eventually get to talk to this woman who, at the time, they're saying she's 127 years old. You can see the great age in her skin and her face. And yes, of course, we've all known or heard about people who age faster than they really are in terms of their features. But when there's someone eating a very pure diet of wild greens, wild game and farm-raised animals right outside your own home, and you're living in the mountains, they're not going to have this aged look without actually being very aged. So I highly recommend watching that. It's very interesting. Looking at her diet, which once again is very basic, local foods, wild foods, definitely some animal foods in there. And she's surrounded by a very supportive, helping community of her family and friends and things like that. And her name, by the way, and I'm sure I'm going to pronounce this wrong, is Luo Meijian. And she lives in the Guangxi province in China. Probably mispronounced that as well. Our fourth story is from the Dominican Republic, a woman who claims to have lived to 128. Or the people around her had claimed that. She passed away, and they were really pushing, and there was some fairly good evidence for that being her age, but it's still yet to be verified. But the Dominican area is already using her name to promote it as a sort of pocket of longevity. Her name was Elizabeth Israel, and the article describes how there's this hotspot of longevity on the area of the island because it's largely untouched and very pristine, and that's typically what we hear about in regards to these areas. So environment plays a huge factor. When you have a very pure, clean, pristine environment, the food that you're going to be getting locally from that is of course going to be very clean and pure, etc. as well. It's not so much rested on any one particular food that they're consuming that often leads to longevity. It's the community in combination with overall lifestyle, of course. And story number 5, which I think was one of the most interesting I came across more recently, was about one of the oldest living indigenous Americans. Now, I have to read the name here because I couldn't memorize it. And this is a male who purportedly lived to be 140 years old. And his name is Gabanagwe Wentse. and he was also nicknamed just John Smith, and the name actually translates as wrinkle meat or old wrinkled meat. And if you go down to that link and look at the story, and there's an image of him, you can see that his skin, probably due to a lot of sunlight over a very long time, has turned very wrinkled, and he looks very old. But there's some people that are claiming this to be a certain type of illness or disease that causes the skin to do this at a much earlier age, and the detractors are saying he's probably only around 60 or 70 tops. So out of the 5 stories, this might be the most legendary because there's the least amount of verification available. He claims to have been around 10 or 11 at the time of the Perseids meteor shower of 1833. And the article isn't even clear when they're saying he died. If he was 140, that would mean it would have been the 70s. But either way, he was a long-lived indigenous elder. And obviously from previous videos you see me do on indigenous diets, would have been high in game meats. It talks about him fishing for sturgeon, various wild edibles and things. A very paleo-like diet, especially if it's a more northern North American country. It's verging on a low-carb, high-protein, high-fat diet. So my main reason for making this video is just to sort of dispel the idea that there's this pinnacle of human longevity which is set at this bar of 120 or so, and very few people make it past 110, and we should accept that we're going to die at 90 to 100 tops. Simply not true. We're getting better ideas of what it takes to live a long time. We're getting more medical technologies that allow us to overcome some of the things that would knock us out at those older ages that aren't chronic illnesses but more accidental type illnesses, whether it's an actual accident that happens to us or something like pneumonia, getting better at fending those off. And then we have to actually take control of our lifestyle and create the optimal environment for us to live in if this is something that we'd like to have as an addition to our life. I never talk about this as the ultimate pinnacle goal. Obviously it's living your life and enjoying life, and this just means you have more time to enjoy and live your life and spend time with community, family, friends, and doing what it is you love. So let me know what you think about this video in the comments below. Like, favorite, and share the video if you feel so inclined. And with that, I'll talk to you next time. Take care and embrace life without limits.